We're letting people in the room right now. And we just started recording. Oh, no. Chris will do that. Yeah, you just have to worry about the quick Q&A at the end. So we're going to get started here. Welcome back to Authors on Tap, where we host amazing writers in conversation with other amazing writers. My name is Javier Ramirez, and along with Kristen Gilbert, run Exile and Bookbill here at 410 South Michigan Avenue, Suite 210 in downtown Chicago. This is going to be a hybrid event tonight, which essentially means that we are broadcasting from the store live as well as virtually to all of you out there. Let's meet our guests for tonight. Lindsay Murbaum is a queer feminist author and high priestess of home mixology. Her short fiction has appeared in PANK, Anomalous Press, The Collagist, Epiphany, Whiskey Paper, which is what I think it is, right? Whiskey, and Harpur Palate, among others. Her essays and interviews can be found in Electric Literature, Bitch Media, the Huffington Post, LA Review of Books, the Rumpus, and more. Lindsay has served as a fiction editor at Rivet, Writing That Risks, and as an editor of book reviews at Necessary Fiction. The Gold Persimmon is her first novel. Congratulations, Lindsay. It's a beautiful book. Layne Fargo is the author of the thrillers Temper and They Never Learn, which she's currently developing for television with PatMa Productions. She's also the co-creator of the Unlikable Female Characters podcast on Lit Hub Radio. Layne lives here in Chicago with her partner and their pets. Congratulations on all of that. That's pretty awesome. For those of you tuning in virtually, too bad you couldn't be here because it's going to be a lot of fun. Also, we encourage you to keep your cameras on, but please mute yourselves into the Q&A portion of the event. Should you have a question, please use the raise hand function or type your question in the chat, and Layne will be sure to ask those of Lindsay. You can purchase both their books through the respective links, and Lindsay and Layne will be happy to sign or personalize copies. You can come down right now and hang out and watch an amazing event. So I'm going to hand it over to Layne and Lindsay. You guys have a great show, all right? Thanks for being here. Put your nice book in there.
See you, but not me. Okay.
We're adjusting.
We're adjusting. It's weird to be in person. We'll do it like that way. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi.
Here we are in person in beautiful downtown Chicago. And I'm so excited to be talking to you about this book today. I really enjoyed it. It was like nothing I'd ever read before.
Thank you so much.
So do you want to tell everyone a little bit about what the Gold Persimmon is about and then read us a little passage?
Absolutely, sure. The Gold Persimmon is essentially about two millennial characters caught in their own realities of grief and loneliness and searching for self. And that isolation manifests within two strange and strangely bizarre hotels. One that is designed really for grief, the Gold Persimmon, and another that is designed really more for sex and intimate connection, the Red Orchid. And the book is kind of full of mysteries and magic, and part of the fun of it is figuring out how these parallel stories intersect or not in some cases. Yeah. How's that?
That's good.
Okay,
it's a hard book to summarize.
It is a really hard book to summarize. Yeah, but I'm giving it my best shot there.
That was good.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
A+.
Read us a little bit.
Absolutely. Okay, so I have decided that I'm going to read from part 2 of this novel, part 2, chapter 2. Okay, so at this point in the book, we've just been introduced to the second hotel, the Red Orchid, and our narrator Jamie has just arrived at this hotel looking for work. And during their interview with Edison, the manager of the hotel, something has happened. They look out the window and there's this fog descending on the city. And the people within the hotel start fleeing. And Jamie suddenly finds himself in this hotel with Edison, this guy they just met, and Adrian, who also works there. And the three of them are trying to cope with this situation and figure things out. So again, this is from part 2. All of a sudden, the lobby was strangely quiet and dark. Adrian was behind the desk, the phone pressed to her ear, waiting for something. Edison hovered over her. How many guests haven't checked out yet? He sounded frantic. Adrian rolled her eyes. Hold on. She scanned her screen. Only a few. There's someone right here in the garden room, looks like. She pointed down the hall. Okay, good. Leave them, Edison said. Should we let them know what's going on? What is going on? Edison aimed a remote at a TV I'd failed to notice. Morning talk show host smiled down at us with ersatz benevolence. She opened her mouth to speak just as Edison changed the channel. I glanced down the hall. You said someone's right here? Wouldn't they hear the commotion? Adrian shook her head at me without looking up from her screen. Soundproof rooms. Soundproofing, of course. How clever. I can go knock. Should I go knock? She ignored me. I'll go, I declared, and headed in the direction Adrian had pointed. Except I didn't know which door to knock on. Then I noticed one was slightly ajar. I pushed it and it glided open silently to reveal a room full of plants, including an apple tree with a basket of fruit at its feet and a crown that grazed the skylight. This had to be the garden room. The glass looked translucent, but I couldn't tell from the floor if it really was so, or if the fog pressing down on it made it appear that way. Or maybe it was dirty with soot. Regardless, the window was a square of gloom on a ceiling painted to look like a clear sky, with glittering butterflies and hummingbirds suspended from wires. Picnic weather. A clock shaped like an owl checked off each second, its eyes sleepily rolling back and forth. It was only 10:30 a.m. The carpet was coarse and resembled artificial scrub grass. The bed was round, nestled in a wicker frame like a bird's nest, the pillows shaped like eggs, the comforter made up of strips of felt in varying shades of brown and beige. And then I realized with a start that someone was there. Asleep in the nest, a shapely leg thrown over the covers. From what I could tell, she was naked. I tried to retreat without waking her, but she sat up, flashing me a small pert breast as she rubbed her eyes, and yawned. Then she saw me. She didn't say anything. My hand was still on the doorknob. I'm so sorry. I looked at the carpet beneath the nest and noticed a condom wrapper lying there amongst some apple cores and small torn up bits of what looked like wax paper. The woman was watching me, bemused, unfazed by a stranger entering her room. She made no move to cover herself. I cleared my throat. There's an emergency. Without a word, she stood up, a silver charm on her wrist catching the light as she reached for her clothes, slung across the back of a chair made of twigs, and began dressing, her back to me. Her ass was tattooed, a constellation in dark blue inked across her left cheek. I wondered which constellation it was. It looked like maybe Orion. She stepped on a piece of the wax paper and it stuck to her foot. A diamond pattern had been pressed into it, like snakeskin. Maybe it really was snakeskin. Then I realized I was still standing there and shut the door. I rushed back down the hall, face burning, watching my sneakers to anchor myself. The TV was on mute. A big-breasted news anchor in a hot pink blazer mouthed words with plump, shining lips, her skin stretched too tightly across her skull for a ripple of emotion. Ribbons of text scrolled across the lower half of the screen. They said something like, mysterious cloud engulfs NYC, mass panic ensues. Not exactly that. Maybe they didn't use the word engulf or panic. Click, clack. It was the woman I had come upon in the bird's nest. She was dressed now in a loose, creamy white blouse and a short, A-line black leather skirt with bare legs and black peep-toe stilettos. She wore no jewelry beside the one slim bracelet with what I now saw was a single cat-shaped charm. She didn't even have on any makeup that I could detect either, though it seemed she had taken the time to brush her hair, which was lustrous and long, shining in a black cascade over her shoulder. The air thickened around her as my stomach oozed up through my chest and swallowed my heart. She saw me looking at her and smiled slightly, a coy smile for herself, not me. I blushed from forehead to collarbone and shifted my gaze back to the TV. The news had turned to a silent video of a podium with the mayor behind it. A cell phone buzzed once, then 3 more times in quick succession. I risked a quick glance at the woman from the garden room, saw her shaking her head at her phone as one finger danced across the screen. Sighing, she walked over to one of the white couches and sat down. Her gait was slightly pigeon-toed. I hadn't looked outside since I'd come back downstairs, even though the door were right there. I moved my head ever so slightly to the side, a little more, with eyes downcast, till I thought I could just get a peek. Then I looked up, fast. At first, I didn't see it, and I felt a swell of relief. I almost laughed. But then I realized I was staring right at it. Except for a little swath of blue, the cloud had enveloped the entire skyscape. It was too dark, too dense, with a purplish hint of violence in its folds. I imagined this was what a storm looked like on Mars. There were faces in its shadows, stern giants frowning down at us, poised to squash or swallow all. The bird's nest woman was looking outside too. Slowly, heels clicking, she made her way over to the glass doors. When she walked, she moved from the shoulder first, her hips following, toes pointed inward. She stood there looking up, the phone in one hand buzzing every few seconds, as she reached up with the other and pressed her palm flat against the glass, fingers swayed. When she turned back toward the room, her wry smile had gone and been replaced by an expression that terrified me far more than the cloud itself. I couldn't know what she saw when she looked up at it, what she knew or imagined that I didn't. Then I noticed a thin strand of white leading out from her temple, stark against her black hair. Had that been there before? It must have, I told myself. My heart was beating too fast, blood thrumming in my ears like someone pounding on a door. I thought of my parents in their quaint little kitchen upstate, the tiny ancient television set my father Harold would prop up on the table if there was something important on and he wanted to watch it during breakfast. My mother frowning, disapproving as always, vigorously scraping a pan from last night's dinner over the sink in the background. Were they watching this? Did they know? I looked around the room, counting. Adrian, Edison, the garden room guest. 4 of us so far. No one was speaking. They were all transfixed by the TV, except Adrian, who was staring stonily ahead, lips sucked in. Couldn't tell what she was looking at, if anything at all. The garden room woman sat on the couch, legs crossed, leather skirt hiked up and twisted around her hips as she continued texting. Slowly, I shuffled across the lobby, then positioned myself a few feet behind the couch, casually leaning on one leg, my chin tilted upward so I could see the TV. I snuck a glance at her phone. Couldn't read the text, only saw the contact was mother. I felt around in my pockets, searching for my own cell phone. Had anyone tried to call me? Then I realized I'd left the phone in my apartment. I could see it clearly, sitting primly on my pillow. I glanced back at her phone and saw the chain of messages growing longer and longer. How many texts had she exchanged within the last 10 minutes? 30? As if she heard me, she looked over her shoulder at me and fluttered her lashes. I'd been caught. I blushed, then cleared my throat, deciding to go with it. Why doesn't she just call you? She paused as if considering how to feel about this question. Then she smirked at me and sighed, rolling her eyes at the same time for a combined effect of exhausted exasperation, because she doesn't want to be a bother. I felt myself smile. I'm sorry, I didn't know what to say. She waved me off. Her nails were glossy, short black cherry squares. There was something inscribed on her charm, a name it looked like. It's fine, she said, and in that moment, I was grateful to her, because it most certainly wasn't fine. Though of course, it wasn't my fault the door had been unlocked and ajar. But nothing was at all fine about today, and I was appreciative of her calm in this moment. The very ordinary thing she was doing, texting her mother, and the ordinary conversation we were having about it, even if her face had shaken me to my core only a few minutes ago. I was supposed to have left already, she murmured. That bed was just surprisingly comfortable. She thrust a slender hand at me. I shook it gently. I'm Josiah. She was Jewish? Again, I blushed. Can I ask you what it was like sleeping in that room? I didn't really sleep much, she smiled, then paused. It was weird. I thought it would just be kind of kitschy and over the top, not necessarily sexy, but it felt very real and strange at the same time. How so? She shook her head. I can't explain it. I wanted to ask about the snakeskin, but couldn't think of a tactful way to mention it. Meanwhile, the TV got unmuted, and the anchorwoman with the motionless face and torpedo breasts suddenly had a voice to tell us she knew nothing, while issuing cautions at seemingly timed intervals to stay indoors, stay inside, don't go out until what? I'll stop there.
I am not glad you're reading about this disaster where like a million cop cars just go.
I noticed that. I was like, they're competing, but it's appropriate.
It's like a soundscape. There you go, just ambiance.
Disaster.
So how did you come up with this book? Because it's so inventive, and I mean the 2 different not even just points of view. I mean, it's two different like universes basically. So how did this come to you? How did you develop it?
I started with a kernel of an idea. This was maybe 10 years ago. I somehow just thought to myself one day, a hotel to cry in. And that's all I had, just that. I just had that to start with. And from there, it was a long journey through my own labyrinth, trying to figure out who's in the hotel, what's happening in the hotel, how do I get people to interact? And then along the way, a second storyline emerged, and I had to try to figure out how to fit that together. So it was a lot of puzzling. It was a lot of puzzling out over many years. I think part of what led to me developing a second narrative was there were so many challenges of trying to get people to interact in the other hotel, the Gold Persimmon, where people are grieving and they are isolated from each other, which means there's no chance of them, hanging out or talking. And I thought, well, maybe there'll be a fire or something and they'll all come together, which is not realistic or practical. Hotels have sprinkler systems. And instead, this disaster narrative of this cloud emerged, and that afforded a lot of opportunities to think about who's really telling this story, who's driving here, who's in charge, and how these different things intersect. I can't remember precisely how that emerged. In my process, sometimes it takes so long to figure things out, or decisions become intuitive, that it's hard for me to remember the exact aha moment, but I remember very distinctly, and I remember sitting in a bar in San Francisco telling other people about this idea and then thinking, oh no, what if they steal it? But they're poets, so probably not.
No, you have to worry about
it. They don't, I shouldn't say that, many poets write novels, but oh no, I'm already getting in trouble. I just had this idea, okay, a hotel to cry in, and that's where it all started.
That's so interesting that you came up with it so long ago, because it feels like such a perfect concept for right now. Like we all kind of needed a hotel to cry in last year.
And
now, really, like still now. Right. And the whole conceit of this disaster that like no one really knows what it is, and they're all trying to figure out what's going on, and they can't contact other people. And I mean, it was just, I think it would have hit different reading this before the events of the last year or so. Yeah. Were you still working on it during the pandemic, or was it already written at that point?
It was already written, so it's kind of crazy how this all happened. At the exact moment that the world shut down, pretty much, I found my publisher, Creature Publishing, and I knew that this book was coming out and it was going to be a thing. And I was still doing some editing, but the basic storyline was done. The characters were set, and so it was trippy to be like, I feel like I'm in my own book. Yeah, that's not good. I want to read it. I don't want to live in it. So it was really weird to like experience a worldwide disaster narrative in real time, while also having written about grief and loneliness and isolation and actual disaster happening in fictional time. Yeah, that was really meta, I guess you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, because it is the same kind of like where it's unfolding so quickly in the second narrative, where the fog is enveloping the city and they're all just trying to figure out what's going on. And that's so how it felt like last March, where everything's just happening so fast and you're like, the information on the ground is changing all the time and you just have no idea. So yeah, it was very like visceral to read that. The whole time I was reading it, I was thinking she must have at least like finished writing this during the pandemic, but you were just ahead of your time, I guess.
I guess so. Sorry, guys. Yeah, well, and of course, the thing that becomes really the most terrifying aspect of part 2 is the interaction of the characters together, the way that they treat each other and how they respond to each other based on what's happening externally is really the true horror. And sadly, that is reflected in our reality as well. The dealing with each other has become one of our greatest challenges and sources of frustration and lots of other feelings. So yeah, that tracks, but it's a total accident. Or is it? I don't know.
Or you clairvoyant.
Yeah, or well, maybe, but fiction reflecting a truth about humanity, regardless of the actual details of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is very much like a queer book, which I, like as a queer author, also appreciated the hell out of. Like, there are not enough super queer books in the world.
There should be more. There will be more.
There will be more.
We're writing them.
We're writing them.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
absolutely. So like, how do you even, I don't know, people ask me this question a lot as a queer author. They're like, what makes a book queer? Like, is it just having queer characters? Is it like your point of view as the queer author? Like, how do you think of that?
It's a great question. Yeah, it's hard to answer. I would say this book is queer, well, on a basic level, because there are lots of queer characters in different ways. And also because it's written from a perspective where it's not going to explain, by the way, this person is queer, and this is what it means. You know, it functions off of a basic level of understanding. And if that's not quite your experience, then great, you get to experience it through the book. And I would say it's also queer in the sense that I aspire to queer the narrative. This book is very much experimental in the sense that it does not follow a traditional, line in terms of storytelling. It's doing some unusual things in terms of paralleling stories. And so I feel like, to me, that is the most queer aspect of it, is what's actually happening with the storytelling itself.
Okay. That's really interesting. So I've never really, I mean, I think of my books as queer just because they have queer people in them and I'm queer, and I don't know how to write a straight book. Like, it's sort of, I even in my debut, the main character was, I thought I meant for her to be straight, and people still are like, oh, she's queer. And I'm like, I guess I just can't write a straight person. I don't understand how their brains work.
What are they thinking about?
I don't know.
What's it like?
I'll never know. So,
I'll never know. Yeah.
So yeah, that narrative, queering the narrative, that's really fascinating. Because it is like, it's the way the two narratives play off of each other. I mean, there's so many like images that recur throughout, and like kind of echoes of the characters and the relationships. And I don't know how much you can talk about that without spoiling things, but like if you want to.
Well, I think the book has something to say about the nature of storytelling itself.
Yeah.
So, the way it's structured is rather intentional, that you're in this one story in part one. And you think, I'm sticking with this, okay. And then you get to part two, and wait a minute, I have a different storyline, I'm in a different voice, how does this connect? And then as you progress with that, you hopefully see how part two reflects upon part one, and what aspects of it kind of illuminates or shines light upon. And the same thing happens when you get to the third part. Spoiler, there's a third part. And so I wanted to kind of reveal how a writer's experience and trauma and observations gets reconstituted as narrative, as story. So there's a lot of mirroring. There's a lot of, characters there's a lot of reflecting. There's a lot of like themes and colors and references that repeat, quite intentionally, to kind of give that sense of the stories being similar to each other but different, and how that happens in terms of what a writer's experience becomes when they're actually producing a story.
And I related so much to Jamie in part two, because they're experiencing this disaster, and the whole time they're like, where's my notebook? I need to write down this detail.
Where's my notebook?
How am I going to use this? How can I like turn this into narrative? And I mean, that's what we do. Like whenever something really bad is going down, like I'm sure, I mean, I'll have like fights with my partner, and inside I'm kind of like, where's my notebook? Write down this line.
Material. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you feel a bit callous. A friend will tell you something weird or terrible, and you go, that's good material.
Yeah.
I'm going to write, do you mind if I steal that? But yeah, I mean, writers steal from everything. We do it consciously and unconsciously. It's just, that's part of storytelling, is that you're, reconstituting what you've seen or what you've heard or felt into a new creation. That's part of the fun of it.
And there's that remove sort of from your life sometimes where you feel like you're watching your life unfold. I felt that with Jamie a lot, where they were sort of like, they're in this situation, but they're taking a step back and observing, as opposed to really, and it can be kind of a self-protective sort of thing, especially when something really bad is going on, where you kind of take a step outside of that. And but you captured that really well.
Thank you.
But it's also, we do steal from everyone. And we strive to be good art friends, not bad art friends.
Oh yeah. I was like, we're not even going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about
it, but I can't help but bring it up. I'm sorry.
I know, it's on everyone's mind.
I was reading about it on the train on the way here. I'm obsessed.
I mean, it's a fascinating story. Yeah. I feel like Jamie's remove from things is part of their identity as a writer, you know, the observational aspect. I feel like it's also connected to their gender in a sense, because Jamie experiences removed from their own body as a non-binary person.
Yeah.
And you see this with Clytemnestra in the first part as well, that there's a certain disassociation happening. And, you know, as a result of trauma, as a result really of the pressures and traumas put upon people by the patriarchy, you know, by our society that insists upon a binary gender and insists upon a certain performance of that gender. So I think there's a lot of reasons for Jamie to be removed in some way, you know. And also Jamie is our storyteller, so they've got to watch and tell us what's going on.
Yeah. And Clytemnestra, there are all those scenes where she's looking at herself in the mirror and almost, that's something I related to a lot as a queer woman, where it's like you see yourself, you also sort of objectify yourself, your own like female body through your own eyes, and then the eyes of patriarchy, and it's sort of unavoidable.
Right. How do I see myself versus how do I think I am being seen? And, you know, over the course of a lifetime of that, how you're being seen really takes the place of what you're seeing, to the point that sometimes you can experience a dysphoria and look at yourself and you don't know what you see, you know? I think that's really profoundly powerful and deeply traumatic for a lot of people who experience that, you know, experience that pressure.
And the way that she thinks about working in the hotel is so fascinating too, because it's almost this like religious devotion to the Gold Persimmon. Like she speaks about it as a temple, and like at that, I don't know, I'd never thought of a hotel that way, but it is almost, it's this strange like liminal anonymous space where people can go and do things that they don't want anyone to know about, or they can like have these secret rendezvous, or I mean, it's, maybe I just miss going to hotels.
Hotels are awesome.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with hotels as liminal spaces. You know, they're absolutely 100% public. I mean, other people are around you right there. You can sometimes hear them. And yet it feels so intensely private. Like this uniform room that looks the same as everyone else's is specifically for me. And behind this door, I do what I'm going to do. And also you can be anyone because you're often a traveler, you know, when you're visiting a hotel. So I'm fascinated by hotels and what they offer and how they work, you know, how they even function. With the Gold Persimmon, I really wanted to push that. And so I created a hotel where the rooms are completely isolated, where anything you want comes through this dumbwaiter, but you don't see housekeeping, you don't see other guests, you have your own check-in time at your own specific check-in desk. And so they're cocooning you in this isolation, which sounds very luxurious and opulent, but also could be extremely difficult and does indeed lead to, you know, issues. And the book begins by talking about how there's been this suicide that changed the way they do things at the hotel, not dramatically, you know, and how there's, you know, concern about what the guests are up to in there.
The soundproofing, so people could be in there just screaming, which is why some people go there, but it's very eerie. And, you know, you would never know, but it also means that they can't hear what's happening outside the room either. So there's something frightening about that. There's something frightening about that level of isolation that requires quite a bit of trust in the hotel itself, despite the fact that we don't really know who owns this hotel and what they're really up to. So it's creepy. But Clytemnestra is super invested in her job. I would say that she derives a lot of her identity from being affiliated with this hotel, that she has a romantic view of it that maybe others don't necessarily share. But, you know, inevitably, because this is a story, that gets challenged and things go awry, in part because of her lesbian lover who's, you know, raising hell and causing problems, you know. Do you want to talk a little bit about her? What a fabulous character. She just like shows up and won't take no for an answer.
I love that you find, this is fascinating because so many people are like, I hate her. She's awful.
Well, okay, but I host
we're getting some thumbs down in the audience.
Podcast called Unlikable Female Characters. So like, you know where I'm coming from.
Well, I'm with you. I'm 100% with you. I love unlikable characters because they're complicated and interesting. Edith was really fun to write. She's terrible. In some ways, you know, she's kind of manipulative, you know, she's a little manipulative. She's definitely got her own issues that she is not fully dealing with, and which Clytemnestra is not really prepared for. There's a big age gap and experience gap there. This is really Clyde's like first serious relationship, you know, but Edith is the one guest that we really get to know a lot about, you know, and the one guest where we actually see inside her home and even inside her experience and memory. And it's pretty tragic what's in there.
Yeah.
Behind that door.
I mean, I think I found her fascinating because she is a type of character that typically would be like a straight cis man, this older lover, very sophisticated and rich, and she's a doctor, she's all this stuff. And
I didn't even think of that. You're right. Exactly.
There's so many narratives where it's like a relationship like that, where it's a man and a younger woman, and that manipulation and paying for everything. And to see that between two women was kind of refreshing. I don't know. She's still terrible, but
she's still terrible, but she's interesting.
Yeah.
You know? And doesn't that redeem her somewhat?
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, she's, you know, you're right. And there is that pattern in the gay community of the older and the younger lover, and the older lover, you know, kind of taking on more of a fatherly role. But I think that pattern is most commonly seen among men. I should be an expert, but I don't. I'm not sure. You know, I haven't seen that as many with two women in a relationship. So.
But
you're right.
In terms of like popular culture, it's almost always like a straight relationship. But,
exactly. Yes.
So.
But it almost always isn't. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And some people have pointed out, you know, that there's possibly some polyamory going on in this book, where people who are married are having other relationships. And I really didn't even think about that in those terms exactly. I just was like, yep, this is what she's doing. There's some other things going on. You'll see. And it's just sort of, you know, sort of taken it at face value in some ways, that these relationships are complicated, and that there might be other people, you know, in the mix. Part of the story.
Yeah, because Edith and her husband seem to have some sort of arrangement, but she's not really honest with Pi about that.
Yeah, so she is being poly. She's not being very open.
She's not being an ethical slut.
Exactly. She's violating the first rule of ethical slutdom, which is communication.
Yes.
Glad we covered that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about working with Creature? Because they seem like such an interesting. Well, first of all, show everyone watching at home the spine on the spine.
Spine on the spine. Creature's signature.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier about the story of how this book came to be published. So yeah, the world was going to hell in a handbasket, and I wasn't so sure I should go to AWP, but I did. My doctor friend told me to go, so you know, my excuse.
His fault.
Yes. And I was shopping this book around at that point, and my best friend went with me, and she was like, you got to go to the book fair and check out this press called Creature Publishing. They're publishing feminist horror. And I was like, feminist horror? That sounds really cool. Do you think that's what I'm doing? And she was like, yes, that's definitely what you're doing. You should go meet them. And I did. And they told me, you know, they had Goddess of Filth coming out, which is about getting possessed by a goddess. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And yeah, so I ended up, you know, becoming one of their authors and being part of the Creature Coven, as I like to call it. And I hope that that's going to catch on.
Oh yeah, that needs to catch on. Yeah. Hashtag Creature Coven.
Thank you. Yes.
We're going to make that happen.
Everyone hashtag that right now. And it was such a wonderful experience to be working with a small press run by women who are dedicated to publishing feminist horror. And for those who are like, what is feminist horror? In a nutshell, it's exploring feminist stories about gender through the tropes of horror. So there might be monsters, there might be witches, there might be violence or inexplicable climatological events, etc. You know, there's all kinds of things that could mean. It's kind of a broad category. And having that framework to talk about my work has really been beneficial to me in terms of positioning where my book fits, even though it is very cross-genre in many ways. And it's also just awesome to be part of what they're doing and be part of this mission, supporting a press that's publishing these amazing and cool books, you know, that's a small indie press run by women. So yay, Creature, if you guys are out there, you're wonderful. Thank you.
I mean, are they the only like specific press for feminist horror? They're the only one I've heard of, but I don't know.
They're the only one that I know of for sure. Javier's nodding, so yeah. The booksellers would know, I think. Yeah. As far as I know, they're the only press devoted solely to feminist horror, which is also really freaking cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
so
really
much like kind of mainstream horror. I mean, it's changing as like all culture is, but it's been very patriarchal, and it's been
Yes.
very much about like violence against
Yes.
women and like reveling in violence against
Yes.
women, sexual violence, all of that.
Yes, American
so-
Psycho and all that.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So it's awesome to flip the script
Yes.
and to give that narrative control to feminists
Mhm.
who, can then explore the horrors of our own experience in our bodies, the horrors of gender, the horrors of binary gender through fiction.
Mhm.
So I think that's pretty cool. I think that, feminist horror has been around for a long time. Like Toni Morrison is feminist horror. The
Yeah.
Beloved is a ghost story. I feel like Carmen Maria Machado has done a lot to bring feminist horror to the forefront
That's a
of,
good point,
of
yes.
readers' awareness. And I think that that's been really important for readers to figure out that horror is not this narrowly defined thing. Horror can mean a lot of things and can explore a lot of interesting aspects of our experience.
Mhm. And there's so many women writing amazing horror, and like my genre is thrillers, and I've often heard people talk about how like the reason so many thriller authors are female is because our lives are like crime stories all the time. Like we walk down the street and we're in danger, and we're
Mhm.
like kind of
Yeah.
thinking about these things that cis men don't have to think about
Right.
so much. And
Definitely see that and They Never Learn.
yeah.
Yeah.
The cis men need to think about it, or someone's going to come for them. That's sort of the genesis of that book.
Scarlet's coming for them.
Yeah. But I think like the same is true of horror. It's like we have a lot of danger, whether it's sort of existential or like real physical threat in our lives. And so it makes sense that we think about these dark things and want to write about them to kind of exercise those demons.
Absolutely. Sometimes people ask me like, is your book scary? How scary is it? Am I gonna have nightmares? And I'm like, well, the scariest thing about it is really gender discrimination. So yes, you might have nightmares.
It's very like eerie though. Like you create such a great atmosphere.
It's unsettling.
Yes.
Yes.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's so much better than like a slasher kind of thing, that it really gets under your skin.
That's my goal, to get under your skin. Exactly.
So I'm so curious about your process. It sounds like it's very, you said intuitive, like it takes you a long time to put things together. And
My process has changed so much since I wrote this book. This wasn't the first book I wrote, but it was the first one that I ever totally finished and was like, okay, for real, I'm going to get this published. Like I'm going to pursue that. Others were kind of like runners up, practice. And I spent a lot of time just really puzzling out the structure, which was really challenging for me. And since then, I've kind of given myself more space to breathe a little bit in writing novels. And I've also taken it upon myself to really make excessive amounts of notes about what exactly is going to happen and who is where and what, because I can't always remember like what color was that person's eyes, what did I do earlier? And so I feel like this book was a little bit like trial by fire. It taught me a lot about how to manage a bunch of characters, how to pull off structure. So it set me up really well to keep experimenting and keep trying with different narratives. But, part of my process with this one was just to really just kept like moving the puzzle pieces, just really kept moving the puzzle pieces around to figure out how it would fit. And I think that makes sense when you read it. I think you can see what I'm talking about there. So that was a great lesson. And it was a challenging start, but here we are.
Yeah, you did not set yourself up for like an easy time. It was a very complex book.
I never do, apparently, no, yeah, it was challenging, for example, in part 2 to manage all these different characters you can only see through Jamie's perspective. So you're not going to get their backstories unless they start spouting monologues, which was not really the kind of day they were having. It was challenging to figure out how to make these two hotels work together and how to try to bring readers into that and how to make that work. But hopefully I pulled it off. And, okay, thank you.
And I know we were talking before this event, since Exile and Book Hill is all about like music and everything, that music is a big part of both of our processes, I think.
Yeah.
And I was in fact vibing to your playlist on the
Oh, you
train on the
listened to
way
my
here. I
playlist.
did,
Thank
yeah,
you.
I loved it. I even stole one of the songs for my current work in progress playlist.
Oh, nice. I'm gonna ask you later about that. Okay, that's exciting.
So do you like actually listen to music while you write? Do you use it for inspiration, or how does that play a part?
I do listen to music when I write. I mean, sometimes when I'm really trying to puzzle out something, a phrase or something, I'll have to pause all sound and just think about it. But I like to use music to set a certain vibe or emotion, which I think can be really helpful, especially if you have a distinct voice in your narrative that you have to kind of get back into the character of every time you're writing. So with this book, I listened to a lot of PJ Harvey. I also listened to some Billie Eilish, although she was not yet popular when I was writing most of this. She was probably in high school still at that point. But once she, once I became aware of her, and she's been described as really creepy, which is what I like about her music. And yeah, I did create a playlist that does in fact mirror the action of the book. I'd be so curious to see what you think's happening
shuffle.
where.
I feel like a jerk now. I gotta listen to it again.
Okay, now you gotta listen to it. It's on Spotify for anyone who's curious. It's the Gold Persimmon mixtape, because when I was younger, that's what we actually did on physical cassette tapes. We made mixtapes for girls we had crushes on.
The kids don't know.
I'm trying to tell them about the mixtape thing. It was like this real serious endeavor when you like somebody, and all the songs would be full of coded messages, for them to figure out. Yeah, I feel like it's wonderful anytime you can incorporate different forms of art or sensory experience into your writing. Again, it sets a certain mood. And in my next book, when I'm working on it, I listened to thunderstorms.
Oh, okay.
I listened to ambient thunderstorms. That's the vibe. So that's all I'll say.
I'm writing a Gothic book right now, and I've done some listening to ambient thunderstorms and also like crackling fireplaces and stuff. I found this thing on YouTube that was like it's like a fireplace in a Gothic mansion, kind of like screensaver thing, and then there's like ghosts floating around in like a rainstorm.
That's amazing. Okay,
so that's what I listen to sometimes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, that sounds really inspiring. I'm gonna just check that out. Yeah, I think that would work. Yeah.
There's a lot of them, but you can get kind of like sucked into just watching the little ghosts like wander by.
Well, that would be my only concern, is that I'd just be going, instead of actually writing. Yeah.
But I always make a playlist. Like that's my first thing. If I have like the seed of an idea, I start a playlist and start to kind of thinking about it. Like I actually don't listen to music most of the time when I'm writing. I use it for brainstorming. So like if I'm doing the dishes or I'm on the train or whatever, I'll put the playlist on. And I have books that I haven't written a word of that I have like a 600 song playlist. Like I just keep adding to it. It's crazy. It's like the vibes, and then eventually I'll figure out how to actually write the book.
You should have mixtapes with the books when they come out. You should have like an album that comes out with the book.
I could have like 12 albums. So
or that
things on the. I have too many things on the playlist, but I will every once in a while if I'm writing a really intense scene. Like in my debut, the kind of big finale, there was this one song I would listen to by July Talk. I would just listen to it like over and over and over again, to the point that I just for hours while I was trying to get the scene right, because it was just like the vibe of it.
I know exactly what you mean, and it sounds excruciating, but I bet you it made sense. It just works to listen to the same thing. Yeah,
it almost becomes that kind of white noise and just like the background to your thoughts. But most of the time I need silence because I'm too distracted.
It's hard. Sometimes you're really fishing it out of yourself, and you're really pulling the words out, and can't have any sound. That's really cool. I'm going to try making the playlist first. I'm going to try that instead of doing it later.
I mean, it's a great way to procrastinate. I'll say that. You can like just
half of writing is procrastinating. Half of writing is sitting there going, oh, I guess I'll go read the Huffington Post right now. Yeah.
But I mean, I've had experiences as well where I like didn't understand a character or like a plot point or something, and then I found this perfect song, and I was like, there it is. That's that person, or that's that moment.
Ooh, that's a good tip too. If you can't figure out a character, find the song that fits them.
Yeah.
That's better than knowing what they would eat for breakfast or something. Like
you know that too.
Yeah.
Like, those are all great procrastination techniques. You can be like, I can't write this until I find the song.
I think that's part of the process. I think you just have to respect the process. That counts as work. That counts.
I think,
Okay, we're gonna say it counts.
It totally counts.
Okay.
We're professionals.
Yes, we're professionals.
So should we take some questions? I don't know.
Sure. Do we have questions?
I don't know if I can read
Oh,
this.
an audience member has a question.
Okay.
It might be a question you can't answer right now.
Well, that's intriguing.
Okay, so if Jamie made a mixtape for Josiah, what would be the first song?
Jamie would never finish it. Jamie would obsess over it so much that it would never be done.
Oh,
The first song, oh
that's an
gosh.
easy answer, though.
I mean, Jamie probably listens to music that I don't even know about because Jamie is younger and cooler than I am. I have to get back to you on that one. What's the first song they would pick for Josiah?
would they
First
know
track
what a
or what's
mixtape
up?
was? Because they're so young.
That's a good question. What did you say?
Say first track to voice subjects.
I know.
That's
Yeah.
the whole mood. Yeah.
I think it would be something kind of lovey but moody because Jamie would be too afraid to go like full on romantic, you know? So I could see it being like a Tory song and Jamie being like, do you know who this is? Sort of old school.
Hipster cred.
Yeah.
You want that plausible deniability because you come right out with a love song, then you
Right.
it's
It's
much.
too forward.
You're
You
like,
know?
oh, did you interpret it that way? I didn't mean it.
Oh, I didn't mean it that way at all.
Yeah.
Well, and Tori
It's a
said
lost
so.
art.
It is a lot. The lost art of the mixtape. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, we have questions here. I can barely read it.
No, those are just the
Oh,
like
those are
announcements.
notes.
So if people
Okay.
have questions, you can leave them in the
Okay.
chat, or you
Or you
can
can also ask them.
raise your hand, or you can ask them, people in the room. Yeah.
I want to ask that horrible question that people ask writers.
Oh, no.
What were your influences reading and influenced your writing, queer or otherwise?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, you know, for this book, the opening quote in this book is from The White Hotel by D.M. Thomas. I dreamt of falling trees in a wild storm. I was between them as a desolate shore came to meet me, and I ran, scared stiff. There was a trap door, but I could not lift it. I told a friend, my friend Zarina Zabriskie, an amazing writer, I told her about the book I was writing, and she said, "You've got to read this book, The White Hotel." I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this novel. So I think it was written in the 80s, and it is in its own way about the Holocaust, but also it's really not. So it's part of it is in letters between Freud and some other people and this patient of Freud's writes this, is having this like inexplicable pain, and you know, she writes these long lyrical, very sexual passages about this fantasy taking place within the White Hotel. And so when you're reading these passages that she's written to Freud, it's like, well, you're in that narrative, and that becomes part of the overall book. Then that transitions to what happens in her life after that, what also happens to Freud himself. And then the very last bit of the book really focuses more on violence from the Holocaust. And in the end, there's this whole Palestine passage, which seems to represent the afterlife. So this was like, it's kind of a wild book. It's kind of an amazing book. And what I've written is very different, but it really inspired me in terms of, you can actually get away with this. You know, it really inspired me in terms of, this is how you can reflect a character's experience in a different narrative. And this is how you can also transition to an entirely different story within the story and still kind of keep it going and make it work. More broadly, I would say, you know, definitely been influenced by Toni Morrison. I've definitely been influenced by Margaret Atwood. You know, I've definitely been influenced by Arundhati Roy and Marguerite Duras, The Lover, both of which are kind of like circular storytelling. And all of this was significant to me because, well, structure, you know, figuring out how to visit and revisit an idea, how to move around a subject rather than just addressing it head on in a more, you know, literal fashion. I mean, I could go on because honestly, I feel influenced by everything that I read, you know, regardless of how deeply it resonates, regardless of how different it is from my work or not. I feel like I take something away from everything that I read. So that's just a sampling, but we could be here all night talking about the influences. But yeah, there's a lot there. So thank you for asking my question. Get any chat questions? No. Okay, quiet. Okay.
Do you have a part of the book that you're just like, I did this so well?
I really love the kitchen scene in part 2 where shit is going down and everyone's freaked out, and then they just gorge in the kitchen. They just like binge on everything and taking fistfuls of things. That was a fun scene to write. I hear about that scene from people a lot, and I feel like I can say I nailed that one.
Yeah. Are there any particular parts that you're like, wow, I probably should have spent more?
My editors would not allow me to say no comment. No. I mean, one thing that's interesting about publishing is that a book is never really done. I mean, you could edit till the end of time. You could tweak and you could change a word and you could change a comma and you could just do that for years. So part of the process of publishing is letting go and at some point saying, well, this as it is now is what it is going to be forever, and I have to just accept that. So
they don't take it from you. They just grab it.
Sometimes they tell you
work on it anymore.
Okay, that happened to me too. They're
Yeah.
like, you're done. You're done. No more quibbling over a comma. Yeah, because when you're just working on it yourself and you're pitching and you're revising, it really feels like you can just keep doing that forever. And you're so focused on getting it accepted and getting it published, that you forget, oh wait, there's going to be a final version. There's going to be an unchangeable version of this. I'm going to have to just, roll with that. So do you find that challenging?
Yeah, but sometimes by the end, I'm just so sick of, I just can't look at it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just like, get it away from me.
That's
but then
fair.
sometimes later I actually, with They Never Learn, I really hated that book when I was writing it. I had like a terrible time. And
no.
I know. And then, but then it
It's
was
such an enjoyable book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was in like a bad headspace, and then it was really like late in the process that I liked it, but it was like the whole time that I didn't. It's just like a strange thing. Sometimes you fall in love with the book right away, and sometimes you fall in love with it later, and sometimes you want to just like shove it away from you, and sometimes you want to hold on to it forever. I mean, they're all really different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess, that brings up an interesting question about the writer's relationship and your own feelings to what you've written.
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of us do kind of feel really insecure or don't like actually what we're doing. I think readers assume that we're so in it every moment. That's not necessarily true.
No, it's
Yeah.
like a lot of moods, many different moods.
Many moods. Yeah.
And it's all in one day.
Yes. And you have to read it so many times
Yeah.
yourself over and over.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, and at some point it's like the words just don't even look like words anymore. It's like a really strange thing writing a book.
It's a really strange thing. It is a very bizarre process.
Mhm.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Mhm.
Yes.
We keep doing it for some reason.
I know, we're all crazy people. Yeah.
Any other questions?
We'll give you homework if you don't ask questions.
Are there any writers that you haven't read yet? Like I want to get into that, like the entire wall, the entire collection. The whole thing.
Yeah, you've got some of them right here. Like Elena Ferrante, I haven't gotten to her yet, but I hear a lot of things. Yeah, and I'm really, really into it. So just hasn't happened yet. What about you?
Well, I am ashamed to say that until recently, I'd never read a book by Sarah Gran, and I got sent her new one that's coming out next February, which is this like erotic thriller about a book of sex magic, and
What?
it blew my mind. You would love this book.
Yeah.
It's so good. Okay.
What's it called?
It's called The Book of the Most Precious Substance.
That's a great title.
The most precious substance is female ejaculate, by the way. I feel like in this crowd, that's like a selling point. So I'm just gonna go for it. But I read this book so quickly and I was so obsessed with it that now I'm like, I need to read every single word that this person has written, like everything.
Okay.
So I'm doing a deep dive now.
Okay. I'm going to follow you.
Come Closer is one of my favorites.
I just read that one and now I have to start on the Claire DeWitt ones. Like everything. I need to read everything. She's read.
She did that, and she did like a series that takes place in New Orleans. But that standalone Come Closer is so good.
Creepy.
Yeah.
It's so creepy and good.
Okay, you guys are selling me on
They have Come Closer on one of these
Yeah,
tables. So
totally.
if you haven't bought a book yet, I
We
think
have bought one, but we could buy more.
Yeah.
I brought an expandable bag.
there you go. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an amazing thing to read a writer's whole collection. You know,
Mhm.
and you get to see how their writing changes also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But think of the book tail you can make for that one.
Yes. Jen's referencing the book tales, the cocktails I make inspired by books.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I made a compendium of cocktails for my own book as a cocreator giveaway kind of thing. And then I was like, oh, maybe some other writers I know would like me to do this for them. And yes, they would, it turns out. So I've made 40 something of them at this point. Some of the recipes have been in LA Review of Books, some of them have been in electric literature. And at this point, I'm kind of starting to select some titles that I want to put together for my own collection, most likely speculative novels written by women, most likely. But it's a totally different process that I really enjoy, because it's like, okay, I'm going to try to represent the feelings and the experience of this book through flavors and sights and smells. So it's a very different experience reading a book with that in mind. And it's really fun. And I also tend to create a whole tableau for the cocktail that I take a photo of, with a lot of, references to things within the book. And it might look like a tangled wild garden. It might look like some kind of candy riddled desert. Like, there's all kinds of images that I'll call upon to try to express something about the book. But it's cool because it's like I'm telling a little story about what my experience of the book was. That's kind of between me and the author, and something people can drink.
So that's gonna be a book, right? You've got to make that into a book.
I'm working on that.
Yeah.
I'm working on that. Yeah, that and like the 5 other books that I want to do. Yeah.
I'm working a beautiful coffee table book. I can just see it. It'd be so good.
Yeah. Yes, I think that would be really fun. Yeah. And there are various books out there of recipes inspired by books, but this really pulls specifically from the text. Like various flavors will reference specific things in the text that are themes or important to the characters or something like that. So I really try to tie it in very closely to the book itself.
That's very cool. I know there's a huge market for that because writers love to drink.
Writers do like to drink.
Yes.
Yep. Sip and read, books and booze. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm gonna keep going with this thread. What is your favorite cocktail choice?
Favorite cocktail I like to make? That's a really hard question. Okay, so lately I've been pretty fixated on this cocktail I made for The Between. Do you know this book? The Between was just re-released. It's a story. It's a horror story written by a Black American woman author, published I think in the 90s when horror was not experiencing the revival it's getting right now, and there wasn't like a huge space for Black women authors in that vein anyway. So I created this cocktail for The Between that's references the coconut cake that the main character's grandmother makes, which is part of a scene that's pivotal to his life story. So there's coconut rum in it. It also references the peach cobbler she makes and the peach color, the color scheme that takes place that appears throughout the book. So I make my own peach syrup to go with this. It has lime zest in it and brown sugar and stuff. And then to add to that some additional lime juice, shake it up, and it's like really tart and delicious, and you can really taste the freshness of the peaches, but it's not overwhelming. And I've just been making that one like all the time. I'm just kind of, my partner can attest. I'm kind of obsessed with that one right now. But it varies because at the point where you've made, over 40 different cocktails for people, you have a lot to choose from in terms of what you would like to make at home. So sometimes I'll just go through, what do I feel like today? What have I made lately that I want to do? So, and I'll get fixated on one for a bit.
So you read all the books that you.
Oh yeah, I can't do it without reading the book, because I specifically am choosing flavors and imagery and the photography of the cocktail that reference specific aspects of the book, particular things that the character eats or that the character likes, or something that shows, okay, yes, I'm really paying attention here, and I'm trying to draw from the text itself to make a drink that not just fits the theme or the mood of the book, but actually contains references itself.
What's your favorite from the Gold Persimmon compendium, and what was the inspiration for that?
That's hard. I think my favorite cocktail of the Gold Persimmon compendium might actually be the signature of the Gold Persimmon itself, which contains bourbon, mezcal, homemade hibiscus syrup, Earl Grey tea, and ginger shrub. I think that might be one of my favorites. But I also really love the Sex and Mirrors in part
It's a
because of the
great
name,
Yeah.
and because it has pear vodka in it, and I just love pear vodka. And it's very floral and fruity. So, you know, that was the cocktails I made for my own book. That was the first time I tried to make drinks based on a book, and obviously I'd already read it many times. It was my own, and so I wasn't choosing just one. I actually made 6 cocktails, which each has a corresponding mocktail. And so I just kind of pulled from different aspects of the book. There's one called the Clytemnestra, which is rather floral and a little bit tart. There's one called the Do Not Disturb, which is strong and sweet, and yeah. There's one called the Fog. So, you know, there's one called the Red Orchid. So various aspects of the book get their own drink. So that was a fun project. It turned our kitchen into a disaster zone for a bit. You know, I decided to make all of them in one weekend to test them and photograph them, and that was a little bit much, but it's fun. And it launched me on this whole project of making drinks for other writers. So it's become my own hobby now.
That's so cool. That's amazing. Does anyone have other questions about cocktails or otherwise?
Or about my book, or about horror, or
Anything.
Do you all want to write it, the story, or do you have a process for it?
for breaking the wall. Yeah. There's always a point where like, I don't know how to fix this, or I don't know what's supposed to happen here, because there's always so many options in terms of how characters can react or like where the story could go. My refrain to myself is always, the answer is in the story, by which I mean, go back to what I've already written, go back to what's already working and see what's there, because usually the solution can be pulled from what you've already created. You know, like, oh, this character said this, now I'm going to expand on that. Or, oh, they went here at one point, let's go back to that point. Usually figuring out where to go forward, you can figure out from where you've already been. That's always my solution. That and having some great editors.
That's really good
helps.
advice. I'm like, I'm gonna write that down.
Okay, good. Yeah, let's make a bumper sticker. It says the answers in the story. That's a good one.
Something else I always wonder is, there are characters that come into a book and they aren't so much, but they're just so much older. Are those people complete? Are those scenes complete, or is it just, you know, as transient as, oh, that person you ran on a bus, or you know, they don't need to be completed.
I mean, sometimes they have their own complete story you just never see. There are a lot of characters that were part of this book that you won't see, but I know that they're there. Yeah, and they're not there. You know, you have same with language, you know, and cutting extra words or extra exposition. You sometimes have to cut characters because they're not really serving the ultimate goal of the story. They're a little bit of a red herring. And, you know, if you have a character that's kind of like there in passing or just kind of a minor figure, whether they have a fully fleshed out story or not, I think the question still remains, what are they doing there? How are they serving the story? How are they moving the story forward? And if they're really not, if they're just kind of a distraction, then sadly you do have to trim them. But, you know, they say there are different kinds of writers, those who do the bare bones and then add, maybe then cut. And then those who just add a lot and take away. I write bare bones and then add, but then I cut a lot. I cut and cut and cut and cut. So a lot gets taken away to kind of leave the form that I'm looking for.
Sometimes you can use those characters in other projects. Like the book I'm working on now, I just
That's
removed
fun.
one of my favorite characters because he wasn't working there, but I'm determined to find him a new home.
Yeah, and I'm doing that as well. You know, I mentioned that I wrote some books as practice before this one, and I'm taking elements from, you know, some stories I wrote many years ago, some characters, some themes and things. I'm using them now in future work. So nothing's ever truly wasted. It's always good to save the excess. And sometimes, you know, you even write short stories out of, you know, pieces of a book that don't make it in. So there's no waste, but not everybody makes it to the final cut, you know. It's just a sad reality for them. Yeah.
I don't write short stories because that shit's way harder than writing novels. Do you think it's harder? Or?
I do
Yeah.
actually. And I spent many years noodling around with short stories, because that's also how you're taught to write. You're taught to write through stories, typically, you know, in workshops and MFA programs and stuff. And I was like, I don't feel like I'm quite always getting this to do what I want it to do. The art of the short story is very difficult. And I've always heard that many writers are really stronger at one area or the other. There are lots that are great at all of them. For me, I feel like my comfort zone is novels. I like having that space to fully explore, to take some more risks. I really enjoy like being able to stick with a story for a long time, but I didn't always. At first I was like, I can't write a novel. I can't be married to a story for so long. I get tired of it, but over time you come up with something that you really want to be committed to. And yes, at times you regret it or you feel, oh, this is so difficult. But if you can create something that captivates you enough that you want to stick with it for years, then well, hopefully that translates to readers. One hopes.
So I came a little bit late, so
Welcome.
can you tell me, like, so for your job, are you a writer or do you write for your hobby?
I am a writer who has also spent many years secretly writing at her desk at various jobs that I have had. Yes. The how do you make money thing is always,
I'm a
yes.
dancer, so
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
So then do you take that as like a serious vocation that you practice? Like, do you sit down every morning at 9 and say, I'm going to continue to write until 11? And yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, this is my practice time.
Yeah.
That's how I write dance. So that's just-
Yeah, I do. What I used to do when, I had a different schedule is I would say, okay, I have to write this many pages this week, or I have to write for this many hours per week. And I did that for years. I did that while teaching full time, many Friday nights for me were spent at the computer. And it's a slow way to go, but slow is still progress. You still get it done. Now I will just be like, okay, I'm going to do this all day, and that is that. And it's very hard to make yourself stay in the chair. I find once I get into the groove, it's easier to just keep going. The hardest part is just to get started, honestly. Yeah. But yeah, I really view it as like, this is a practice that you have to try to invest a lot of time and energy to achieve mastery, and it requires a lot of diligence, and it's not always fun in that way. It can be sort of painful, but you do it because that's what's inside you and because it's its own reward in a way. What about you? What's your
I'm a full-time writer. I left my day job. I actually had planned this well in advance, but it turned out that I left my day job on March 12th, 2020.
Oh, wow.
Which is great.
Perfect timing.
Great. The next day, my partner, the place where he works closed down. So then he was at home with me while I was trying to write, which was great.
that's always fun.
Yeah, I did not murder him, even though if you read my book, you'll know I know a lot of ways to do that.
That's true.
I'm not as disciplined as you. I'm much more chaotic. I don't know if it's because I'm a Gemini or what the deal is.
Oh, you're a Gemini. Oh my goodness. Okay.
I know. Now you're like, I don't know if I want to be sitting so close to you. I'm not sure. But I like to work on a bunch of different things at once. So if I cannot face my certain project that day, I'll just work on something else. Like I'm writing a novel now. I've got a couple others that I'm just poking away at as I have time. And then I'm working on some projects for Audible with co-authors, and I'm writing a screenplay, and so I just kind of bounce back and forth.
You're busy.
But it doesn't lead to a lot of things being finished in a timely fashion, but it keeps me interested.
Neither does making cocktails, but we gotta do what we gotta do.
Since you do this full time, do you regularly write articles that you then some answers like the nomad kind of but what's your paycheck?
Right now it's the television option for this book, and my audiobook projects, which I'm writing. I sold with my co-authors, we sold the concept, and then now we're writing it, but we've already been paid some for it. So that's it for now. I mean, in a few months we'll see. But that's how it is right now.
So that's like a contract.
Yes.
Now you have to produce the work.
Exactly. Where the novel that I'm working on right now, I don't have a contract. I'm writing it, and then we're going to try and sell it. But some of the other things I'm writing, I do have a contract already.
Years.
What? Oh, mine or hers?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Oh, thanks.
It always looks like the person is looking that way, and then you see the face looking at you.
What's funny about that image is they originally sent it to me and the model looked like kind of like almost like friendly. And I was like, this is a book about a serial killer. We can't do this. So they like photoshopped her eye to make it kind of like meaner and it worked.
Isn't that amazing? That a slight change.
Yeah.
Just changes the
Because I was like, I love it. I love the hair. I love like everything, but she just looks too nice. And they were like, hold please.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Do you have a sound? Sorry. New question. Do you have I'm always fascinated about how people read something. That I got that out of the. So I'm wondering, do you have sounding boards that kind of read, messages and kind of spot check and see, am I getting the point I was trying to cross? Or you just kind of find those, okay, this is what I want to cross, and people can read it how.
I think there's always a mix. At this stage, well, certainly your editors and also your agent will read and give feedback. And so there's revisions at several stages of the process. But there's also what's called beta readers, which might be friends or might be other people that you asked to read a book and give you feedback. So yeah, absolutely. I think having feedback is really important. I think it's best to get feedback from someone that you feel like gets what you're trying to do, so you can kind of see how that lands. But absolutely, yeah, my partner reads everything multiple times often. My best friend, who was the one who discovered my press for me and sent me their way, is an amazing editor. She edited this book. My agent edited this book. My publishers edited this book. And that's only, a small sampling. My next book is currently with a beta reader right now. I think feedback is hugely important. Yeah, sure. You can just be like, I think this works as it is, just going to go with it. But even if you decide that, it's not going to happen that way, because in the process of publishing, you're going to get feedback. A publisher might even ask you to make edits before they decide if they're going to buy a book. That's a thing that happens too. So there's edits all along the process, which is part of why something never feels finished until it's done. But you might have, I don't know if your process is different.
I don't usually have people read stuff like as I go, unless I'm really stuck. But I do have 2 writer friends that we meet almost weekly. We FaceTime and we'll just talk through like plot problems or kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And then if I do get really stuck with something, I just need some feedback, I'll send it to one of them. And then when I'm done, they'll read it, and my agent, and then eventually editor. But when I'm actually writing, I can get too like caught up in like pleasing the other people almost. It's like I have to get it down, and then I'm very receptive to feedback, and I love to just like slash and burn and edit. And I'm not really precious about it, but when I'm actually writing, I like to kind of protect it, I guess. I don't know if that's
yeah. I don't tend to let people see something until there's a finished draft. I want to be protective of that process. Yeah.
So with all these multiple layers of it, you ever get to the finished product and you look at it and go, it's not what I wrote, because everybody had a different idea, and you have to listen to the publisher,
Right.
otherwise you're not going to print.
I think that happens sometimes, but my publisher was amazing at editing my book. They just were like, had a couple questions and suggestions, and I was like, oh, okay. And I made decisions based off that feedback. So I never felt like, oh, this isn't really mine anymore. Or like, oh, I just have to write this scene this way because they said so. There's always a negotiation process that goes on with editing. You can speak back to what an editor has said. And also they may present a problem as they see it, but how you solve it is usually up to you as the writer. So you can still maintain that sort of authority over it, I think, anyway.
Yeah, you kind of have to know which battles to fight, and that's a good point about like you have the choice of how to fix it. And I think it's Neil Gaiman, at least I've seen this attributed to him, that he says that if somebody tells you something is wrong with the book, they're right, but when they tell you how to fix it, they're usually wrong about that. Like you have to come up with your own way to fix it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes you'll get feedback in the process. It could be really anywhere that you're like, that doesn't really resonate, and that happens a lot when people are shopping books around. Like you might get feedback from an editor who's not buying your book who says XYZ, and it might not feel great. And so my thing is always, does it resonate? Does it reflect the deep-seated concerns you yourself have about your book? And if not, then you got to let it go, because everyone has their own opinion and not every book is for every reader. So you got to stay true to what you feel like is right for your book. But it's important, I think, to take feedback, to see what these people are seeing and what they have to say about it. I think that's important. Anything else? Okay.
All right, that was really awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for showing up, by the way. Everyone, I'm going to turn this around for a minute. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Just know that you can purchase both of these amazing books, and there's a spine again, through exileandbookfield.com. Layne and Lindsay will be happy to sign copies tonight, send them out to you all over the country, and come by the store if you're in Chicago, say hi, pick up copies of both of these. The holidays are coming up pretty quick. And once again, thanks everyone for showing up. Thanks everyone for showing up tonight to the event. And thank you guys, well, Lindsay and Layne, thank you guys so much for a great conversation. And have a good night.